Okay, so I thought I was recording, but I wasn't. So, welcome to Talia Nerds Out. I'm really disappointed because I was really on a roll, but I can start over again. Um, this video is not going to be my normal video. This is based off of a conversation in the comments of my last video that was prompted by a bit of a tangent I went off on, comparing the way Fanny Price and Anne Elliot are unfavorably treated by most readers in comparison to Lizzie Bennet, and how Lizzie Bennet's flaws oftentimes get ignored, and her flaws are actually quite unpleasant ones. So I had commented on that briefly for me in the last video, and Too Fond of Books had acknowledged this in the comments, and had also stated that Emma's faults get readily acknowledged, whereas Lizzie's get ignored, which I agree. Actually, Emma kind of gets poked fun at throughout her novel by the narrator, my narrative voice. It is fully acknowledged that she is very full of faults. But Lizzie, I don't think that Austen intended for Lizzie's faults to be ignored. I think that she did intend to build this fully complex character, which she did. But people get taken up with Lizzie's sass and her outspokenness and really her vivacious personality, that they miss the fact that she has all these other faults, which I will go into more later. And so it's really interesting that Emma gets a certain treatment, and actually so do, like I said, Fanny Price and Anne Elliot, but Lizzie doesn't. Lizzie, by most readers, just really gets kind of she just really gets a lot better treatment. She doesn't get, her faults don't get highlighted, which is a shame because they're there and they make her character more interesting. So what this video is, or what prompted, I told you what prompted the video, but as I was mulling over the comment last night and, thinking, oh, what am I going to say, blah, 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 it made me think, well, these are the opinions I hold about Lizzie. Where would I rank her among Jane Austen heroines? Because I know where most people seem to rank her. It's right up at the top. Lizzie is usually like everyone's favorite. Everyone wants to be Lizzie. And I think that's what it also is. Everyone wants to be Lizzie. They don't necessarily think what it would be like to be around Lizzie. They just want to be her. Which is, I think, once you think about what it's like to be around that person, that gives you a whole different perspective. But while I was thinking this and about where I'd rank Lizzie, I was like, I should just rank my Jane Austen heroines, how I, from least to favorite to most favorite, and why I feel that way. Because I think my point of view might be a bit different than most of the lists that you see out there. Lists are nothing new. Everyone, it seems, has done a Jane Austen heroine rating list at some point or another, if they're, Janeites. But I want to do my own thing with it and discuss these characters in more depth. Yes, I know they're not real, but I get really engrossed in characters and what makes them tick. And Jane Austen does a very good job of making her characters feel real. But I am taking heroines from the main 6 novels. I'm not including Lady Susan, although Lady Susan, the novella Lady Susan, is a big favorite of mine. Lady Susan is not a heroine. I don't think she's a heroine even in her own story. She knows she's manipulative. I think she even knows she's a witch. I think, witch with a B, but she doesn't care. She, I think, rather enjoys it. The only person she doesn't really seem to manipulate is her friend that she writes back and forth to. Strangely, they really seem to be quite honest with each other. I guess it's because they're birds of a feather. But yeah, as much as I enjoy Lady Susan, it's because she is just so completely, unflinchingly, delightfully awful. But that a heroine does not make. So, she's not on this list. So, let me take a sip of my tea, and then I'll get started. This is Adagio Tea's Lavender London Fog, and I added 2 tablespoons of vanilla almond milk. This is a tea steep. It doesn't come like prepackaged or anything. Loose leaf. Anyway. So, least favorite to most favorite. Marianne Dashwood is my absolute least favorite Jane Austen heroine. I cannot stand her. The girl is ungrateful, selfish, rude, melodramatic, at times cruel. She can't put herself out to even try to understand other people's point of view. She really doesn't get how Eleanor could possibly like someone who doesn't share her exact passions the same way she does. That's anathema to Marianne. Marianne almost has to be, especially early on in the book, and for most of the book, Marianne feels that she has to almost be with a carbon copy of herself, except male. But part of that is immaturity. She's 16, 17. But part of it is just her character flaws. And being with Willoughby only exacerbates this, only makes her character flaws worse. She leans into them. She now has a partner in crime to mock others with, to encourage her in her rudeness and her ungrateful and selfish behavior. And together, their mocking of Colonel Brandon can be quite cruel. Colonel Brandon has only ever been very nice to Marianne, but Marianne really sees no problem in, bad-mouthing him, talking really unkindly about him with Willoughby. It's a really unpleasant character flaw of hers. And I don't think it's just that she's a sheep. It's really, it is part of her character. She just has a tendency towards thinking poorly of people if she doesn't feel like they measure up for whatever reason. And you see this actually in her treatment of Sir John, in her treatment of Mrs. Jennings. There is a point with Sir John's wife, and I'm flipping through, but there's a point with Sir John's wife, and I can't remember her actual last name, but she wants to start up a card game. Now, Marianne doesn't want to play cards. That's fine. The problem is Marianne doesn't even attempt to find a way to nicely get out of playing cards. Or she doesn't even try to be like, okay, I'll play a little bit, but then I want to stop. There's no compromise for Marianne. Marianne only wants to do what Marianne wants to do. She prides herself on being completely honest. She thinks that you have to be just free with your opinions, that constraining any desires is constraining any desire, holding back any emotion, or just not being completely transparent, completely just not letting it all out there. She feels like if you don't be completely out there for the whole world to see exactly how you feel, and only do what you want, then you're doing it wrong. She criticizes Eleanor quite often for the fact that Eleanor holds back a bit. Eleanor keeps a lot to herself. And Marianne complains about the fact that she feels that Eleanor is not being open enough. And honestly, Eleanor's not required to, and Marianne is really overshares. If Marianne had Facebook, she'd be that person who'd be oversharing everything. She would be telling you her every little squabble and complaint, every little thought that goes through her head, because she just feels like it needs to be out there. But a big example I always think of her rudeness is, like I said, there's this card game that Sir John's wife wants to build up. Marianne doesn't want to play. So instead of saying nicely or finding a way to nicely get out of it, or only play, compromise and play a little bit, she very rudely and abruptly is like, I don't want to play. Where's your pianoforte? And she goes off and plays music. And Sir John's wife is actually a little bit offended because Marianne did not try to be polite. And Sir John's wife is about decorum, and she's not the brightest bulb in the packet, and she's not very deep, but she can tell when she was being treated poorly. And she rightfully was offended. In the same situation, Eleanor didn't want to play cards either, but she found a way to nicely get out of it. She found a way to get out of it without offending her hostess. And that's the other thing. This leads to Marianne's real strong streak of ingratitude. She has no gratitude for the fact that Sir John is constantly inviting he always tries to make them a part of his social circle. He brings them, he brings them things he hunts. He brings their mail for them. He found them this place to live when they were in dire straits. And she really doesn't have a whole lot of gratitude for that. Hang on, off screen for a second. Allergies, apologies. Okay, sorry. But yeah, she has no real gratitude for that. And also she really doesn't, only briefly does she show gratitude to Mrs. Jennings for agreeing to take her to London. And it's only because she really wants to see Willoughby. She doesn't, so for that short period of time, yeah, she's grateful, but she makes no real effort to socialize with Mrs. Jennings during that time period. Eleanor only goes along, even though she doesn't want to, even though she knows that Edward might be there, and that would actually be rather painful for her. She goes because she knows that Marianne would be a very poor companion to Mrs. Jennings, who is only being kind to her. And Marianne has this tendency, even without Willoughby being there, to ascribe the worst intentions to those around her who she doesn't think measure up. So She decides that the only reason Sir John invites the sisters so often to see him is because he wants the entertainment of having a bigger party. And yes, he does like having a bigger party, but there is a true kindness to him. He might not be the deepest man in the world, but he does like having them around. Yes, he's not, polished or anything like that, but he is kind to them. But she decides that it's only the selfish reason, and it's the worst possible reason she could give for him to invite them and have them around. And for Mrs. Jennings, again, she's like, well, we're just fun as sport, they can make jokes off of us. And they do make jokes, but they do that to everybody. That's just their sense of humor. It's not very, refined or anything, but they aren't just picking on the Dashwood sisters alone. They will do that to anybody in their circle. That's actually their way of making them, they're making them feel, they're including them in that way. In a family, you tend to pick on those, or even your group of friends, you don't pick on strangers, you pick on those who are close to you. And they are kind of doing that. They are saying, hey, come in, we, feel comfortable enough with you to pick on you, to tease you. Now, I don't think it's hard for Sir John or Mrs. Jennings to get close to anyone. They would invite anyone in. That's just the kind of people they are. It's really funny that actually Sir John's not the one related to Mrs. Jennings. His wife is, and she couldn't be more different. But Lady Middleton, that's her name. But yeah, there is very little gratitude in Marianne, and she, like I said, she wants to see the worst in people. So, and she's very much, if she's having a bad time, she can't imagine that anyone else might be. She can't imagine that anyone's pain has ever been greater than her pain. And I know that it was hard what she was going through with Willoughby. And she got a lot of sympathy for it. But she didn't even appreciate that until, she didn't even try to appreciate that until she realized what Eleanor was going through. She just really, again, I believe when she was talking about it to Eleanor, she was saying, well, this is, this gives them something to gossip about. This is, again, ascribing the worst possible motives. And she wouldn't try to put herself out. If she was going to be miserable, she wanted to be entirely miserable. She wanted to wallow in it. No effort of any self-control, no attempt to be mature. She was just all emotion, and that, to her, that was a noble thing. Now, she does get better much later in the novel, and that is due to Eleanor's influence. But for a while, she tries to compare pain, say she can justify, well, mine's so much worse, that's why I behave the way I do. But eventually she has to admit to her, even to herself, no, Eleanor had a lot of pain to deal with too, and she still managed to not show it, to keep going on, to live, to not be a miserable person who just wallows in their own self-pity and refuses to function at all. So, yeah, I'm not fond of Marianne at all. So I know that she gets her little redemption arc at the end, but she's just not for me. Now that I have basically slammed Marianne for, what, 20 minutes? I have a feeling this might be a long video. On to Emma. Actually, I don't really have... Emma's a hard novel to read in some ways because Emma's choices are difficult to deal with. She is definitely a product of her time. But even when she... And there is selfishness when she wanted Harriet to be a part of her social circle, and in wanting to believe that Harriet was of higher class than she was. She wanted to keep a companion with her after she lost her governess as companion, because she went and got married. So there was a level of selfishness there, but I truly believe she thought she was doing a good thing by helping Harriet find someone. Yes, there was a selfishness in not wanting her to be with the farmer that she wanted to be with, who she actually liked, because in Emma's mind, the social classes were so far apart that she could not socialize with Harriet anymore if Harriet married into a lower sphere. And that was very common during that time period. You kept within your sphere. It was not socially acceptable to socialize outside your sphere. So Emma didn't want to lose Harriet as companion, so she did her best to thwart that match from occurring. She tried to match Harriet with someone else. Now, she did want Harriet to be happy, but she wanted her to be happy on her terms. And Emma's also a character who thinks very highly of her abilities. She thinks that she's more clever and more... She can see things more clearly than other people, such as anything dealing with relationships. She kind of... There's a point where she laughs off Mr. Knightley's brother when he's like, hey, I think that Mr. Hold on. My brain is not present today, so I'm going to be pulling out books to remember names. Mr. Elton. When he is like, hey, Mr. Knightley's brother's like, hey, I think this guy, Mr. Elton, actually likes you. And she's like, no. She refuses to accept that Mr. Knightley's brother might be picking up something that she has missed. And he ended up being totally right. And she was totally wrong. So, but Emma's flaws are kind of are constantly shown throughout the novel. She's a very rounded character with flaws. She has good things to her as well. She is very loving to her father, and there's absolutely no selfishness with that. She has actually put her own life on hold for her father. She would have even had problems marrying Mr. Knightley, spoiler alert. She would have even had problems marrying Mr. Knightley if there was not a way that she could still keep her father, be with her father, and not disrupt his happiness of being at home and his comfort level. Mr. Knightley did the really, honestly amazing thing of choosing to move out of his home, even though he's still going to keep it up and things like that, move out of his home into hers so that Emma's father does not have to at all be discomforted or inconvenienced by Emma getting married. Because for Emma's father, Emma getting married, any change in his routine is very upsetting to him, he still calls Emma's, what is he said? He calls Emma's former governess poor Miss Taylor. Poor Miss Taylor got married to a man she loved, but in Mr. Woodhouse's mind, because she left his immediate family circle, she no longer lives with them. It's disrupted his peace, the way he's used to things being. Because that's the case, and it upsets him, he assumes that it must be upsetting to her as well. So it's poor Miss Taylor. And Emma getting married is the same way. The one way that he ends up actually being completely on board with them getting married, and actually sooner than they expected, was because there was like a series of events where, I guess, animals got stolen out of their coops, hens got stolen out of coops or something like that. And he ended up being really nervous, because he's a very nervous person, about he and Emma being alone. So the idea of having Mr. Knightley as a son-in-law in the house suddenly became very, a very desirable thing. But that's kind of going off on a tangent. Emma has her very good qualities, her devotion to her father, and to a certain extent, wanting to do the right thing, wanting to be kind, but a lot of times her self-interest or her feeling of self-importance can get in the way of that. And I think that's why Jane Austen said this is a heroine only I can love. Emma is an interesting character. Like I said, she's toward the bottom of my list, but I can appreciate her, and I don't dislike her nearly as much as I do Marianne Dashwood. I don't feel her flaws are nearly as awful, are nearly as, I don't know, they're just, Emma's selfishness doesn't seem to be as nasty in a certain way. I know that she nearly ruined Harriet's happiness. Now, Harriet also is a sheep, and she would have believed whatever Emma told her would be right. Excuse me, allergies. And maybe Harriet, because of her naturally sweet and obliging nature, would have been happy in whatever marriage she would have contracted, just because she would choose to be so. But yeah, Emma's choices her interference could have ruined Harriet's life. And it nearly actually ruined Emma's own happiness. But yeah, I don't feel like her flaws, maybe because, like I said, they come from a place of, even with the selfishness, even with the self-interest, even with the self-importance, there seems to be an underlying thread of, she does want to be a good person, and she does have people she truly cares about, and is and there is a definite self-sacrifice that she makes with her father. Even I mean, her treatment of of Jane Fairfax's aunt, Miss Bates, is terrible. There's no excuse for that. And Frank Churchill definitely egged that on. But there is no excuse for the treatment of Miss Bates. And Emma did feel ashamed right away, because she did have that self-awareness. Also, she had Mr. Knightley to call her out on it. She was not the type to just be like, well, I'm right, and just stubbornly hold to it. She was actually in tears on the way back from the Box Hill incident, because Mr. Knightley was disappointed in her, and she knew she behaved badly. She had no problem trying to go and apologize, both to Miss Bates and to Jane Fairfax, although Jane Fairfax did avoid her, but for other reasons. She stepped up her attempts to be nicer, she really tried to make amends. Emma is a very complex character, and like I said, I could see why Jane Austen would state that she's a heroine only she can love, but even though Emma's not my favorite, I can see parts of her that I could love, even though I think she would frustrate me to a certain extent in real life. Okay, next on the list for me, this is going to be shorter because there's simply not as much to say about her, is Jane Bennet. And honestly, she's so low on the list, not from any fault of her own. I just don't connect with her that much. I do respect the fact that she chooses to see the best in people. And this does sometimes lead to her being taken advantage of. But I don't see this as a fault of hers. It's not a bad thing to want to see the best in people. Now, there is a certain point where you just have to accept they're not really that good of a person. And she does actually come to that point with Mr. Bingley's sisters, when she realizes that she's been snubbed, that they really don't care about her. And it's hard for Jane to get to that point because she really, really wants to see the best in people. She's almost like the polar opposite of Marianne Dashwood. And sometimes in her seeing the best in people, she can be more perceptive than her sister, because she is looking for good traits rather than hunting for things to mock. And yeah, I do like Jane. She's not as well developed as Lizzie, because Lizzie is the main protagonist, and so we don't really see a lot of Jane's faults. I mean, it's mentioned that Jane has a certain reserve, and that's why people didn't realize that she was in love with Bingley to the point that she was. And that's what got her into the situation that she was in. But Jane's faults aren't really highlighted because she's not the main character. She is a main character and a very important character, but ultimately she's not one that we're going to get a full rounded picture of. So that's the only reason why she's this far down on the list, is she just doesn't have a lot to connect to, other than the fact that she's just a really nice and good person who chooses to do the best in people. Now, for most people, I don't think that Lizzie would be this far down the list. But Lizzie is right here at the number 4 slot for me, smack dab in the middle. Because initially Lizzie would have probably been my favorite when I first started reading Jane Austen. But as time progressed, and as I was rereading Jane Austen's novels multiple times, my goal a lot of times is to get through all of her novels in a year. And as I started focusing more on the small details, because I wasn't just having to catch everything for the first time, I could focus on other things, I started noticing things about Lizzie that I never really had before. Lizzie is a very judgmental person. You can see where the effect of her dad on her. She's very much a daddy's girl, where, she is her father's favorite, and she actually reflects some of his worst attributes. I mean, he is someone who also likes to laugh at the world. He likes to mock the world. He does it all the time about his wife, which is not a good thing to do. But it is led Lizzie to think poorly of her mother as well. She doesn't openly mock her the way that her father does, but she does have a poor opinion of her, and that is her father's fault. But having her father be the way he is and having him favor her because she is more quick than her sister, she's more witty than her sisters, having him favor her, I think has caused her to imitate these tendencies in him, to look at the world through the eyes of, okay, what flaws can I pick out and laugh at? And I don't think she believes that I don't think she realizes that this might not be a healthy thing, that this might not be a nice thing. I don't think she means to be cruel, but it's really she's really a proud person as well as a judgmental one. And she believes that she is more clever and can see things more clearly than other people, can see other people's faults more clearly, she thinks very well of herself. And it's almost to the point that she blinds herself to where she has flaws. She also is unable/unwilling to see another person's point of view when it doesn't jive with her own. So Jane, even though Jane's not always right, when Jane wants to see the best in people, Lizzie won't even try. She automatically assumes that her version is right and Jane's is wrong, because she thinks that she is more perceptive than Jane. Even though she loves Jane greatly, Jane's probably her favorite. She is her favorite person in her family, and her closest friend. But she believes herself to be more perceptive. And when it came to Mr. Darcy, she really wasn't. She chose to see the absolute worst, and Jane tried to be like, well, there might be two sides to this story. There might be something that we don't know here. Like, there might be, he's possibly not as awful as you seem to think he is. But Lizzie wants to believe that he is, terrible and proud, and there's nothing redeeming about him. And so she looks for those things that confirm this. It's confirmation bias. She wants to believe that he's awful, so Wickham's story is very much something that she is receptive to. She is easy prey to his lies because his lies confirm her own opinions. So this judgmental behavior makes her narrow-minded and prevents her from being really self-reflective, because she kind of believes she has it all together. She knows she's intelligent. She knows that she feels like she's very perceptive, and she can be at times. I mean, she is perceptive, but not nearly to the extent that she believes she is. The other thing that is a problem is that Lizzie has problems accepting that a decision that's not right for her might be the right decision for someone else. And you see this when it comes to Charlotte Lucas. Lizzie refuses a proposal from Mr. Collins. She just feels that he is ridiculous, that she wants nothing to do with him. She definitely doesn't want to be married to him. That's fine. She knows what will make her happy. But Charlotte has never been a romantic. Charlotte knows that she is, I think she's like 28. So she's basically considered a spinster, whereas Lizzie is 21, maybe? I think she's 2021. Lizzie has much more time than Charlotte does. Charlotte's reaching the end of, the point where people are going to be interested in her. She's already considered a spinster. Lizzie is in her, people are still going to be very interested in Lizzie. Lizzie is not in the same circumstance as Charlotte. And Lizzie has the luxury of being more romantic. She's, very witty. She's lovely. She can be quite attractive to the opposite sex. Charlotte, I believe it mentions she's rather plain looking. And like I said, she's a spinster. She's 28. And during that time period, that was quite old to not be married. So she knew that if she did not get married, she was going to be a burden upon her family. Her brothers would have to find a way to support her, because as the daughter of a knight, as the daughter of someone who has landed gentry, unless she wanted to be a governess or something of that sort, she really couldn't work and keep her head held high. So Charlotte was needing a husband, and she never espoused romantic ideas. She felt a marriage would work if you chose to make it work. So to her, Mr. Collins was quite a catch. He had the parsonage, he had a good wage coming in. He could afford to, keep bread on the table, give her a roof over her head, keep her safe from want, and put her in a position to make her own happiness. But Lizzie could not understand how anyone could accept such a silly man, or a man that she thought was completely, really too silly to find someone. She had never believed in Charlotte's frequently repeated sentiments about marriage and whether or not love was an important part of it. Because love was a very important part of marriage for her, because she had seen how a match where love had not really been there, she had seen that in her own home, with her father mocking her mother and things like that. So she didn't want a marriage without love. She really wanted this deep connection. But because she wanted that, to her it was completely bonkers that Charlotte couldn't want the same, even though she said that she just wanted to have, security. And I think there's a point in the book, it's right after she hears that Charlotte's made this decision, and she congratulates her once she gets over the shock, especially after Charlotte rebukes her, saying, do you believe that just because you refused him, that no one else could accept him or would want to accept him? I think there's a point where she says, and it's the narrative inner think, but from her point of view, they could never have the intimacy of before because of this decision that Charlotte made. And because Charlotte made a decision that did not match the way you would make a decision, Charlotte didn't go and murder somebody. Charlotte just did like she always said. She married for security, and she chose to find a way she worked to find a way to be happy in that life. And honestly, because Charlotte's working at it, she probably will be relatively happy because she's putting forth the effort. And yeah, so that was a problem with Lizzie's character. Now, to be fair, Lizzie is a very likable character. My only problems with Lizzie, the only reason why these faults got highlighted for me for Lizzie to the point where she kind of bugged me was because no one seems to highlight her faults. Lizzie's always praised for her virtues, which is she's very outspoken. Now, with her outspokenness, sometimes it could be a problem because I think about with Mr. Darcy, she made no bones to anyone about the fact that she didn't like him. And so when she had to walk it back, it was very embarrassing because she was very proud of the fact that she, was open about this opinion. And it also, that was what put her in a position to be tricked by Mr. Wickham, to be taken advantage of by his story. But, yeah, so her outspokenness, while it was very good for her when it came to dealing with Lady Catherine de Bourgh and Lady Catherine de Bourgh's imperiousness and unreasonable demands, like asking questions in an impertinent manner and expecting answers just because of who she was, and also her attempt to intimidate Lizzie to give up any sort of engagement or possible engagement with Mr. Darcy. So in that way, Lizzie's strong-mindedness really helped her. But like I said, it harmed her in other ways because it caused her to be narrow-minded. And I happen to be an opinionated person who likes to hold, can be very stubborn. And so Lizzie's faults do mirror mine to a certain extent, so they tend to bug me more. And that might be why I focus on them more. But also, yeah, Lizzie, no one seems to highlight the faults. And I feel like it doesn't do Lizzie credit to only focus on her good points, because if you only focus on her good points, you don't appreciate how rounded her character is. That while she is this very vivacious and caring and clever, witty person, she also has these flaws. But if you only look at the one side and you don't have the flaws, she can be a little bit, cookie cutter, kind of like some of the heroines in movies today, where they don't want them to be flawed. They just want them to be, strong female character. Well, strong female character is well-rounded, and Lizzie is well-rounded, but people don't always see that. Also, without seeing how well-rounded Lizzie is, not only not doing her credit, but you don't get to appreciate her character arc. Because then you see, Lizzie goes to the point where she's, she's judgmental. She only sees that she really thinks she's very perceptive, and that that a lot of people don't see things that she does, and so she's, right, and that what's right for her must be right for other people. So she starts off at that point. But then you see, as the story progresses, particularly after Darcy's letter, you see her come to realization, wow, how horribly I behaved. And I prided myself on my perception, on my, intelligence, on all these things, and I was so terribly wrong. And again, like Emma, one of her greatest virtues is the fact that once she gets over her anger about this letter and her desire to deny it, the truth of it. Once she reads it over and sits there and gives it its full, really tries to give it a fair reading, she realizes, no, this is, this is true and I was wrong. And then you see change. And that is a really beautiful part of Lizzie's character, that she can admit she's wrong when it's proven to her. And then she can make efforts to change. And she does. And she can acknowledge that there are ways that Darcy can help her continue to prove herself, widen her worldview. Yes, she can help him with bringing some humor into his life and letting him take himself less seriously. But he can help her with the fact that he knows more of the world. He has seen more things. And so maybe, because she's lived in this smaller town, she learning from him wider, more of the wider world, more things, she can see where it can improve her. So Lizzie does come a very long way. And actually that is a virtue of hers that doesn't get praised enough, because everyone focuses on the more, the more fun things, her sassiness, her, strength, her most obvious strength, which is, strong-mindedness and holding to her opinions in spite of adversity and those kind of things. Her, just, they focus on the fun things. But Lizzie's ability to accept that she is wrong and to change is just as wonderful, honestly, I would say even more wonderful quality than all of her others put together. And you can't appreciate Lizzie fully and Lizzie's greatest quality if you don't accept that she has some very great faults. So yeah, that's my thing on Lizzie. Is I do like Lizzie. She really bugs me at times, but that's because of her particular set of faults. But she has a wonderful arc, and I wish that maybe that would be highlighted by more people, instead of just, going for the, what do they call it? It's just like the little quick one-liners, oh, that was really funny, that thing that Lizzie said. Oh, it's really funny, Yeah, she's really funny, but she's deeper than that. Okay, then next on my list is Fanny Price. And yes, Fanny Price is higher in my echelon of heroines than Lizzie Bennet, which a lot of people wouldn't put Fanny there. A lot of people would probably put Fanny way at the bottom. Fanny is an incredible character. Fanny is someone who is, first of all, naturally reserved, naturally shy. She is pulled from her family that she loves, that she's really tied to. She has a brother that she's really close to, and in her family circle, she's very valued as an older sister. But she's ripped from that. I mean, to help her, to make it that way, the family doesn't have to pay for one more mouth to feed, and to provide her with more opportunities. But it is very hard for Fanny, because Fanny loved her family, and she's very shy naturally. So she was very miserable when she first came to Mansfield Park. And no one seemed to understand. Now, Edmund did come to understand later and came to support her. But Fanny was someone who needed some sort of support, needed some encouragement. And other than Edmund, she really didn't receive it. She didn't receive a whole lot of love outside of Edmund. And all of us require love. And it was very hard for her. She really was made to feel that her position she was below everyone else in the family. Now, Edmund tried to bring her, her virtues up to everyone's view and try to help people treat her better. But even he, especially when Mary Crawford came along, wasn't as good about it as maybe he could have been. But Fanny Fanny oftentimes gets targeted and gets maligned as a character who is, she's too passive. She's a doormat. And Fanny's not a doormat. Yes, Fanny is someone who is really treated poorly. But she also knows that she has been provided an opportunity of living in a way that she wouldn't have been able to, in a nice house with probably clothes that were nicer than she would have had, and food that were nicer than she probably would have, and opportunities for an education she wouldn't have had if she had stayed at home, which she finds out when she's sent back home at one point in the story. But she's really grateful for the opportunity that she's been given, because she does know that it was a great opportunity. She knows that where her position is socially, when you're dealing with social spheres of the time, where she lies in comparison to her cousins. And she acknowledges that. But she is bullied by her Aunt Norris constantly. And another YouTuber pointed this out, and I totally agree with this. Fanny, people want Fanny to fight back, but it wouldn't have helped Fanny to fight back, because all it would have done was made her situation worse. And Fanny's not a dummy. Fanny has to survive here, so she takes it, lets it roll off her back as much as she can, because she needs to keep going. And she has the strength to deal with this constant abuse and still continue to be sweet to others, continue to develop as a person to the point where she has, and this is partially Edmund's help too, she develops her own opinions about things and is able to deem them as important in spite of being made to feel that she isn't important by most everyone around her. And this is shown most drastically, well, there's 2 points, and this is what everyone tends to bring up when they tend to defend Fanny. The play, where she completely, even though it's hard for her, she doesn't like attention, she doesn't want to have people mad at her, but she also believes that this play is inappropriate, and apparently it's quite racy. Not even for I think it was like there was some incest or something in it. I seem to remember that's what one of the videos I listened to said. So it was a racy play. It was inappropriate to have with people who were, you had young men and young women who had all these the sexual tension anyway going on, and just wasn't appropriate. Especially it wasn't appropriate for Maria as an engaged woman to play a part that put her romantically with someone who she was attracted to. It just wasn't a great situation. And the other thing was, it was most of them knew that if Sir Thomas Bertram was at home, he would not have approved of this play, or of a play being held in his house. But they chose to do it in his absence. And Fanny alone continued to protest this is wrong. Fanny alone refused to participate. The only way in which she really participated was to try to distract Maria's fiancé from how badly he was being treated by Maria. When he needed help with his lines, she would prompt him, or she would listen to him. She was there for him, even though, he was a silly man. But she held strong. I don't want to do this. I know this is wrong. Where Edmund eventually crumbled because Mary Crawford talked him into it. And Edmund, who, for all his attempts to, he did a lot to try to form Fanny, but he was not strong enough to hold up when there was too much pressure. Fanny was. And the other thing that really goes to her favor is that when it came down to her own happiness, she made a stand. When it came down to her ultimate happiness, she made a stand. When Mr. Crawford, can't pull his first name out of my head, but when Mary Crawford's brother first of all, he wanted to seduce her, and he wanted to get to her the way he did Maria and her sister, because it bothered him that Fanny obviously disapproved of him. And the more he couldn't get through to Fanny, the more Fanny remained uninterested, the more he actually really became interested. It stopped being a game, and he started developing some real feelings for her, partially because, she was unattainable or seemed unattainable. He started registering her virtues that Edmund had already seen. But Fanny didn't trust this change. Fanny didn't want to be with someone who did not share her values, who she disapproved of, and who she didn't think would make her happy. And she held out against great pressure from her Uncle Bertram, who she was terrified of, from Mary Crawford, from Mary Crawford, yes, but from both Edmund and her brother, who were the two people she loved most in the world. She even held up when she was sent home to see what would it be like to live without the, rich life she had been living at Mansfield Park. And she wasn't happy there because, they were not refined, and she didn't necessarily she wasn't made to feel part of the family. But even in spite of that, she tried to find a way to connect, and she tried to find a way to be happy. She tried to help her sister, who eventually ended up coming back with her to Mansfield Park, because Fanny's about service and about doing the right thing. Fanny isn't popular to readers, I think, because not only do they see her as passive and a doormat, which she isn't, because a passive doormat could not be as, cannot hold as strong to her values that she does. But the other complaint people have about her is that she is a prude, or that I think it's basically she's a prude. I don't think having moral values is a prude. She doesn't approve of someone who, oh, by the way, ended up running away with, with a married woman, having an affair with a married woman. Oh, guess she read him right. And she didn't approve of a racy play being done in someone's home when that person wouldn't approve of it. That's just a respect thing. Fanny, felt for people when she felt that they were being mistreated. Like Mr. Rushfield, I believe his name, by his fiancée Maria. She felt very bad for him because Maria treated him horribly and didn't really try to hide the fact that she was more interested in Henry Crawford than him. Fanny was able to put herself in other people's shoes. Fanny is just a good person. Do I really like the way her love story ended out, that she ended up with Edmund? I don't really care for Edmund that much. I can see certain virtues of his, but like another YouTuber had said in defense of Fanny, that was Fanny's choice though. Fanny liked him, and he ended up liking her. So if that's what made Fanny happy, then that's a choice she should have made. So yeah, Fanny is a much better character than even people in Jane Austen's time gave her credit for, because Fanny has depth. She has a lot going on there. She was beaten down, but she wasn't destroyed. They didn't break her spirit, even if she was made to feel that she was lesser than. They didn't break her to the point that she could not stand up and say, no, this is wrong. This is what's important to me, when she felt that she needed to. So, yeah, Fanny is a really good character, and I wish she was better appreciated. Next on my list, and this is a really long video, is Catherine Morland. Catherine Morland is just a sweet, artless girl. She's young, she's naive, she's innocent. There's not a mean bone in her body. Yes, she got a bit silly over those Gothic novels, and she let her imagination run away with her. But when she let her imagination run away with her, and she suspected the worst of Henry Tilney's father, it wasn't out of like a spite, or it wasn't like a Marianne Dashwood where it came from a place of like, it wasn't like she wasn't trying to be nasty or something. Where, I don't know, Marianne Dashwood's just feels, it feels like she didn't want to see the best, so she didn't. With Catherine Morland, she thought she saw signs based off on things that she had seen in Gothic novels, that there was some sort of dramatic thing going here, and that, Henry Tilney's father must have murdered his wife. But that was because Catherine had really allowed herself to almost believe that what Gothic novels showed could be real. And she ended up being right that Henry's father was not the nicest person, but he wasn't a murderer. And when she was brought to her senses, she was immediately contrite. She felt horrible about it, terribly embarrassed, and she realized how wrong she was. And Catherine is like Jane Bennet to a certain extent, where she usually does try to see the best in people. It takes her a long time to realize that her first friend in Bath, now I'm going to pull Mansfield Park out. I'm going to have all my Jane Austen books on my lap here. Isabella Thorpe. She didn't see through Isabella Thorpe as being a, conniving and two-faced person, because that's not the way Catherine was. Catherine truly believed that people were good and kind because that's how she was. And I think Henry Tilney even says that at some point in the novel. He's like, well, you are this, you are this good of a person. You are not a, basically you are innocent. You are someone who is exactly how you portray yourself to be, and what you mean what you say. But because of this, Catherine, with her innocence and naivete, believed Isabella meant what she said. So every time Isabella Thorpe would react in a way that was contrary to something she said, Catherine was really confused, because she didn't understand how Isabella could say one thing and do another. But she really wanted to be the best to her friend, and she was blinded by her until her friend jilted Catherine's brother because he didn't have enough money to suit her, or as much money as she thought he did, as she thought he did, yeah. So it took a while for Catherine's eyes to be opened. So in some ways, she's like Jane Bennet in that. Just, I think she's younger than Jane is. But yeah, I do love that about Catherine. She is really a simple soul. She's a lovely girl, and I don't just mean physically. She's lovely as a person. And I think she would be nice to spend time around, even if she is naive and a bit imaginative. I think she'll grow out of that stage where she is, goes into flights of fancy. But you see her youth when there's a point where Isabella Thorpe wants to talk about, I think it's Captain Tilney. I think it's about Henry Tilney's brother. Or maybe it's about Catherine's brother. I can't remember. Isabella Thorpe is trying to coyly, pretend that she isn't interested in anybody, and she just, is all about girl friendship. But she's trying to get Catherine to slyly be like, oh, yeah, but she wants Catherine to tease her about people who are interested in her. Kind of like, in Sense and Sensibility, the eldest of the my brain's of the Steele sisters. I think it's Anne is her name. They call her by two different names, which is why I get confused. But the eldest of the Steele sisters, she is always trying to. I got cut off. She's always trying to say things to get people to draw conclusions about, oh, this guy is interested in you, and she wants to be teased about it. That's kind of what Isabella Thorpe is doing. The problem is, Catherine is not a sly person, is not someone who necessarily reads between the lines, and because she's not artful and not manipulative, she doesn't realize what Isabella's doing. She takes Isabella at her word. Oh, you're all about friendship with your girls. Okay, cool. And she believes her, which is not what Isabella Thorpe intended. But yeah, so she believes her, and what you see is, this is where you see her youth as well, is she keeps trying to interrupt the conversation and get it back on track about talking about the Gothic novel they're reading, because that's what she's thinking about. That's what she's interested in, because in a lot of ways, she's kind of still a child. She's, growing into a woman, but she is enthralled by this imaginative world, and she just doesn't catch on to what Isabella's doing, and she thinks Isabella, who introduced her to these novels, is just as interested in it as she is. That is my take on Catherine Morland. She does have her faults, and a lot of them, it's just her gullibility does hurt her at points, but there's not a mean bone in that girl's body. She really means well, and I think that's what makes her such a likable character. Okay, so it was really hard to choose who was my favorite of these next two characters, because I love them both. It was very hard, but the next one on my list ended up being Elinor Dashwood. I see a lot of myself in Elinor Dashwood. Now, I do see my faults in Lizzie Bennet, but I see some of the things that and maybe these are things that I particularly like about myself, I see in Elinor Dashwood. I appreciate self-control. I feel like self-control is very important. I think that you don't need to let all your emotions out there for the world to see. And Eleanor is wonderful at this. And it does hurt her at times. And I've actually done that to the point where it's hurt me at times. But Eleanor is a character who's able to, put on her game face, as we said in nursing, as one of my nursing professors said, put on your game face. And even if she was having this awful thing going on over here, she put on her game face and was still able to act like nothing was going on when she needed to. She was able to put the happiness of others before her own. She was able to behave in a way that was commendable in spite of the pain that she was feeling. She did not owe Lucy Steele anything. Lucy Steele, and this is an example, Lucy Steele forced her confidences upon Eleanor, really as a way to, mark her territory. This is my man, hands off. She really didn't want to be friends with Eleanor. And Eleanor didn't see it as a friendship, because it wasn't. But she knew it was a secret engagement, and she kept it secret, even from Marianne. And so the cause of her pain and the pain itself could not be told to anybody without revealing Lucy Steele's secret. And Eleanor had the, my words are failing me. I wish I could remember the word. Brain fog. I hate it. She was honorable. That's not quite the word I'm looking for, but she was honorable, and so she did not put her own needs, maybe let off some steam before what she saw as honorable, like keeping confidences that were forced upon her. Even if they were forced upon her, she kept what should have been secret, because it did not feel honorable to her to divulge the secret. And she behaved, in a way, like she treated people with respect, even when they hurt her. Like sometimes the teasings pointed in her direction, particularly when they're about Edmund, really caused her pain. But she dealt with it. Marianne's unfeeling words and assumption that her sister was happy hurt Eleanor, but she dealt with it because she held a secret, and because that secret was a huge part of her pain, she could not divulge that. So Eleanor has her self-control, her sense of honor. These are two things I greatly admire in her. Now, there are points where she jumps to conclusions, like she assumes the hair in the ring that Edward has is hers. But Marianne jumps to the same conclusion. In some ways, she has the same ability to have sensibility the way that Marianne does. She just puts a lid on it when she needs to. Marianne doesn't understand what self-control means, and she doesn't want to for most of the book. Nor does Eleanor's mother. Eleanor realizes that she has to be the one to kind of be the middleman between Marianne and everybody else, because she needs to make sure that people don't get their feelings hurt, that she needs to sometimes tell those little half-truths or just smile and nod, that when you need to just get along. She's someone who doesn't just focus on herself, even when she's in a lot of pain. So, yeah, I greatly admire Eleanor. Like I said, there are the the fact that she might bottle things too much. As someone who has a tendency to bottle things up, I don't see it that way, but I can see where it could be seen that way because it does hurt her at points. But I don't know how she could have done it any other way without being dishonorable. But yeah, Eleanor's faults for me are a little harder to find, but it might be because I really appreciate the virtues that she has, where someone else might see some of the virtues that I see as being her faults. Trying to think what her faults might be. So, I mean, you could say resentment for Lucy Steele, but Lucy Steele really kind of deserves that resentment because she really is a nasty person. And I truly believe that Lucy Steele meant Eleanor to take the wrong impression from her little meeting with the Dashwoods servant where she announces that she is a Mrs. Ferris, I think the last name is. I always say it wrong. Ferrars, something like that. She wants Eleanor to believe that she married Edward, even though she didn't. She married Edward's brother. But out of just plain mean-spiritedness, she didn't want Eleanor to get what she wanted, get married to the person she wanted. She wanted to continue to hurt Eleanor, even though there was no reason to. Eleanor wasn't a threat to her anymore, because Lucy Steele had the guy she chose to marry, and she had the money that she wanted. So, yeah, I can't really say that the resentment is uncalled for in that case. I mean, Eleanor feels a lot under the surface that she doesn't show, but what she manages to control it, so it's not like she allows what she feels to really hurt anybody else. Maybe the fact that she allows herself to be blinded a little bit by Edward. She maybe doesn't, I mean, she's very forgiving of him, maybe a bit too forgiving, even though I do understand his situation. She has to have faults I'm not seeing. If you're watching this, yeah, please put in the comments below what you think Eleanor's faults are, because I'm having trouble seeing them, but I also really like Eleanor. So that could be just a bit of a mental block for me. So my top favorite one is Anne Elliot. And in some ways, and I said this in a YouTube comment to someone before, in defense of Anne Elliot, I could see if Eleanor had not had the supportive mother and the supportive sisters that she had, if she was in the same family situation as Anne, Eleanor could have become Anne Elliot, because they share a lot of the same tendencies. They both have a tendency to be reserved and self-controlled. They both think logically. Actually, they both are the ones who make suggestions on how their family can financially make changes, spend within their means, live within their means. They both are the ones who do that for their families. Now, Eleanor's family ends up listening to her better. Anne's family just kind of ignores whatever she says. So Anne is someone who she's definitely made to feel by her family that her opinion's not important, and they would really rather spend time with anyone other than her. Particularly her father and her eldest sister, Elizabeth. Elizabeth would prefer someone actually of a lower class than her. And I'm talking about not Mrs. Smith. Talking about Mr. Shepherd, but Mrs. Clay. There we go. So Elizabeth would even prefer Mrs. Clay, who's of a lower social class, to be her companion than her sister. I think because her sister's common sense doesn't jive well with the elevated sense of self that both Elizabeth and her father have, and they don't want to have restrictions put upon them. And someone like Anne, who's practical, would put restrictions upon them. Now, to offset that, there's Lady Russell, who definitely appreciates Anne's virtues and makes sure that she knows it. She does support her, even if she persuaded her to make an opinion that Anne does regret a decision to break off an engagement to a man she truly loved. She was lucky she got a second chance, but she did not go ahead and accept the next engagement, next offer that she received, which was eventually accepted by her sister Mary, because she didn't love, it's Charles Musgrove. So she didn't love Charles that way. So she didn't marry him. She didn't accept the offer. Now Mary did, and Charles and Mary make their life each other absolutely miserable. Now Mary is someone who, to a certain extent, does appreciate Anne, which is somewhat nice to Anne, because Anne likes to feel useful, even if Mary doesn't always show her appreciation well. She's a complainer, she's a hypochondriac, but she always wants Anne when she feels unloved, not treated well, when she feels like she needs some support. So Anne does have that, albeit selfish, appreciation of Anne's capabilities. So that's a long way of saying that I do think that Anne, it turns out a little differently than Eleanor because of what's around her. And a lot of what's going on with Anne is in her head. She's a wallflower, but she is not, she's off to the side, but she's not unobservant. She takes in what's around her. She makes her own opinions. She does feel deeply, and yeah, she is a very internal character. But she does not let her internal turmoil about seeing Captain Wentworth again affect the way that she behaves, because she is more of an adult than that. She knows that, her decisions brought her to this point, and even in spite of her inner turmoil, she knows that she still needs to behave well. I think one of the things I appreciate most about Anne is, well, as her ability to have self-control in spite of what's going on with her, kind of like Eleanor. I love Anne's cool under pressure. She is very practical, and when you have a point when one of the Musgrove girls gets hurt from a really reckless decision on her part, Anne immediately steps into action when everyone else freezes. She starts, even though, she's just as shocked as everyone else, she realizes someone needs to take charge. And it's actually not Captain Wentworth, surprisingly, who is supposedly used to stressful situations. Now, granted, he also feels responsible. He's just in shock. But Anne puts aside her own feelings and is like, okay, stuff needs to be done. Okay, you get a surgeon. No, not you. She almost sends Charles, and then she's like, no, you don't know where to go. Then she sends, Captain Wentworth's friend. You know where to find a surgeon. Go and grab one. We need one. And she does things to try to keep the situation under control, to try to move things forward instead of just having everything dissolve into hysterics. Captain Wentworth in particular wanted Anne to stay with Louisa because Anne was practical. Anne knew how to be useful. Anne could be self-sacrificing, and things weren't all about Anne, and she knew it. She was not self-absorbed. Now, that didn't end up happening because Mary Elliot made it all about her, because she's like, well, I have a closer claim, and why can't I stay? And she was absolutely of no use to the family that was taking care of blessed, my brain is mush, of the Musgrove girl while she was there. So Mary was of no use but her selfishness, her sense of self-importance demanded that she be there. Anne ended up being sent with Captain Wentworth instead to bring the message to the Musgroves. And again, Anne shows her strength here. First of all, it's a very uncomfortable ride for her, but she does it because it needs to be done. So when they took Henrietta back, she said to Captain Wentworth, hey, you go first, prep her parents, I'll follow. And then also, when the parents are like, oh my gosh, I want to go, and we need to go and see them. We need to see how they're doing. When they did decide to get up and go, Anne took care of things at the house because she was like, this is what's needed. She always does what's needed without not thinking about what's most glorious, what makes her look best. She's practical. She's, self-effacing. She's just a great person. If I had to choose which heroine to be like, I probably want to be like Anne because of her ability to put others first, be decisive when needed, listen to others' opinions. Yes, she, was persuaded when she was younger, but as someone else pointed out in a video, and I actually had never thought of this way, Lady Russell was like a mother figure to her, so she was acquiescing because someone who was a mother figure to her advised her to break off the engagement. So a lot of girls are strongly influenced by their mother, and Anne was strongly influenced by her mother figure. As she grew, she began to see and began to feel, actually, sorry for Lady Russell, but how obvious it was Lady Russell was trying to make sure that Anne did not know that Captain Wentworth was in the area. She felt like sorry for that she would stoop to such subterfuge. Anne was perceptive in a way that Lizzie liked to think she was, but Anne knew that something was wrong with Mr. Elliot. She knew that he was too good to be true, and so she didn't trust him. She kind of held off. She didn't let the temptation of becoming Lady Elliot herself blind her to the fact that something was wrong with him. And this was confirmed when her friend Mrs. Jones revealed all. Anne's faults. She does, like Eleanor, she tends to hold things in. But it's not always a bad thing the way she does. I have to think more, because for Anne and Eleanor, I find looking for faults to be a lot harder. I know a lot of people, I've heard people call Anne dull, but I simply don't agree. She's a very interesting character. It's just that she might not be active in the way the other characters are because the action is going on in her head. She's doing a lot mentally, emotionally, but she's just not letting it show. I mean, I guess you could say sometimes she's too obliging. she can be put upon sometimes, particularly by people like Mary. But honestly, Anne, for the most part, is someone that I have trouble finding faults in. I'm sure she has them. If you can think of them below, please add them on. Add your comments, because like with Eleanor, I see what some people might see as faults, like maybe that they're too reserved or whatever. I see their reservedness, their self-control as a strength and not as a weakness, because these are things that I value, that I see as being so much more valuable than outspokenness that hurts others. But yeah, so that's my list of Jane Austen heroines and why I think of them the way I do. How would you rate your Jane Austen heroines? Has my diatribe changed your opinion at all of any of these ladies? Or is your opinion exactly the same as it always was, and do you think I'm just full of it? And I wish I don't have like these little wing things going on with my hair, but it's curling exactly the way it wants to. Oh, wow. Okay, so yeah, that is all about that. It's a bit of an odd video for me because it's not about any one particular book. It's about characterizations in general. I actually feel very strongly about characters. I really get into them. I am a fan of character-driven stories. If the story is more plot-driven with very little character development, I tend to lose interest. It's also the way I tend to write when I do write. It's very character-driven. It's, what's going on in their head, what makes them the way they are. And that's what's important to me. I want characters with depth, with a fullness to them. And I know that there are faults, because I know that both Eleanor and Anne are fully developed characters. But just because I can't see their faults doesn't mean they're not there. I know I can be blinded to their faults because, like I said, they have the virtues that I find most valuable. But yeah, so that's my list. I look forward to hearing what you say. I'm going to have to try to see if I can combine the two videos because my camera cut off when I had an alarm go off. But yeah, this will probably take a while to go up. Hope you enjoy this. God bless. Bye.